I'm Nicole from House of Akong, and today I'm going to be guiding you through a project which is making a faux fur scarf like this one. This is a scarf I've had in my wardrobe for years, and it has been a perennial staple in my winter wardrobe because it is just so comfy and so lovely and cozy. The nice feature about this is it's got a little slit here where you can put the other side into and adjust it so that it stays nice and close to your neck and keeps you all snugly throughout the winter. The other nice thing about this project is that you can use up any remnants of faux fur or even any other cozy fabric that you might have in your stash. Anything like a faux sheepskin, faux fur, anything with a nice pile and feels nice to the skin would work really well for this project. I'm going to be using some remnants from this really lush inky blue faux fur that I used to make myself a winter coat. So are you ready? Let's get started. So here I have traced off a pattern piece, which is just following the shape of the scarf that I already own. And I've just marked the position of where the slit is going to go. I'm going to have to cut two pieces here in my faux fur, and I'm going to join them here along the center back. And for the lining, I'm going to use a black wool. You could also use a fur on the other side for the lining if you wish. Let me show you two examples of using it with the fur as a lining and also using another sort of lining. So here on the scarf that I already have, you can see that on both sides, they have used faux fur on both sides. This one does not have a center back seam, and you can see that the pile runs the same way all the way along. That's fine if you've got a nice short pile. What it does mean though is that when the scarf is folded like this, you'll have one side of the pile going down and one side of the pile going up. If you don't mind that, that's fine. You can cut this all as one piece, but I'm going to cut mine into two pieces on center back and have the pile going in opposite directions. Here's an example of another scarf that I have where they have used the faux fur on one side and they have used a knit just to line it on the other side. So this is the style that I'm going to do. I'm going to line mine with a black wool and because my pile is actually quite long, and then just have the faux fur on one side. So here I have my faux fur that I'm using for this project. And if I turn it back to the other side so you can see, what I've done is I've actually combined a few remnants into one whole piece that I can use now to cut out. This is a great way of using any scraps that you have, because once you have made the seam here to join the bits of fur, if you're really careful and you manage to sew the pile so that it doesn't get trapped into the seam allowance and too bulky, you can actually achieve quite a seamless finish here. So that's what I'm doing here. And I'm going to put my pattern piece on top. And I'm first going to cut one piece here. I'm conscious that I want to make sure that the slit marking is going to sit on one side of the seam here so that I don't have to go across the seam. That's going to make it quite bulky. And I'm just leaving myself a little 1 centimeter seam allowance on this side in order to join the center back on each side. Now, when sewing with faux fur, it's kind of advisable not to use pins because the pins will distort the shape of the pattern, bearing in mind how thick the fabric is because of the pile. If the reverse of your faux fur fabric is a light color, you can simply take any kind of marker, any sort of invisible marker, or even a Sharpie, and just trace the pattern piece around the outside. Because my faux fur is quite a dark color on the other side and markers aren't really going to show up effectively, I could either use some tailor's chalk. I can use some tailor's chalk to mark around the edge. Or what I prefer to do is grab my pattern weights. And I'm just going to put my pattern weights to hold the pattern piece down on the fabric. And now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to make very, very small clips. If I just go up in here, just so I can get to where the pattern is. And I'm taking very, very small clips because what I don't want to do is just chop into the pile and give it quite a severe edge. I want to make sure that the pile is being kept intact on the other side. So I'm just taking the bottom of my scissors and just very gently making very small snips all the way around so that I can keep the pile intact on the other side. Now I've finished cutting around, and you can see when I peel this away that the pile is still left nicely intact. What I want to do now is just transfer the marking to where I need to cut and stitch to make the slit. To do that, I'm just going to take a few pins and I'm going to stick the pin just where the slit finishes and starts. And I'm also going to put one in the middle. Now I'm just going to lift my pattern piece up just so I can see where the pins have gone through. And now I'm just going to take my tailor's chalk and I'm just going to fill in that line by joining the dots between the pins. Just like so. And then I'm just going to make a little mark here just to indicate where it starts and stops. Now I want to cut out the piece for the other side. So what I'm going to do, just so I don't get confused, is I have this piece that is running with the pile going this way. And this time I am going to have the pile running this way, which is the opposite direction. And I'm going to put my pattern piece on top facing the other way. Now this is actually symmetrical this way, so I don't have to put it on mirror image, although I could, it doesn't really matter in this instance. But here I'm just going to lay that on. Again, I'm going to give myself a 1 centimeter seam allowance, just so I can join on centre back. If I was cutting this out in one piece, I'd have to cut on the fold and I wouldn't need this extra seam allowance. Now I have both my bits of faux fur cut out. The next stage is to cut the lining. For the lining, I'm using this black woven wool. And because I have quite a nice length of it, I am just going to actually cut the lining on the fold. So I'm just placing the pattern piece here on the fold. So again, I'm just going to use my pattern weights. And this time I'm going to use my rotary cutter to cut around the lining. Now I do need to transfer the marking onto one side of the lining to show where the slit is going to be. For that, I will use my carbon paper and my tracing wheel. So I'm going to transfer the marking to the wrong side of the lining because when I come to sew this together, it's going to be right sides together. And there you have it. Now that we have all of our pieces cut out, we can start sewing. The first thing we are going to do is connect the faux fur pieces together by the centre back seam. So for that, we're going to place the faux fur pieces right sides together. And we are going to stitch along this seam here, making sure that we are moving the pile out of the way to reduce bulk in the seam. Now you may use pins if you wish, but I prefer for this type of job to use these little clips. As you clip the two bits of fabric together, just make sure that you are gently moving the pile into and away from the seam allowance. This will make your seam a lot neater and a lot less bulky. Now we're just going to take it to the machine and make a straight stitch 1 centimeter seam allowance going all the way down. Just a few little notes on the machine settings before we start sewing. Firstly, the needle, I am using a ballpoint needle, which is size 90. I've got my machine on a straight stitch and I've got the stitch length set to about 3.5. So now I am going to join my centre back seam on the faux fur. And here is the finished seam. What I'm going to do is just open it out, and just to get rid of the visibility here a little bit, I'm just going to take a comb and just start brushing the pile so that all of the pile comes out of the seam allowance. And it just makes that seam just a little bit less visible. The next stage in the process is to connect the faux fur to the lining around the area that we had marked for the slit. So I'm just going to put the right sides facing together And here I've got the slit marked on this side. So I just want to roughly make sure that the markings are matching up. So here I'm just going to take my clips and just clip the lining and the faux fur together, just around this area. Just to show you what's going to happen when I take this to the machine, I'm going to have my needle and I'm going to start it in this position, just where these two lines intersect. So just at the very point that marks the opening of the slit. I'm going to go in a very, very small, almost eye shape. So not quite oval. I'm going to stay only about 1 millimeter away from this line, but I'm just going to ever so slightly curve, follow this line along about 1 millimeter away from the marking. And then I'm going to stop exactly at the point of this T junction here. Then I'm going to pivot on to the other side, and I'm going to do the same on here. I'm going to start at this point. I'm just going to go about 1 millimeter away from the bottom of the line and then meet again at this point. So here's what that stitching looks like now. So I've started at each point and I've just gone in a bit of a, I don't know what shape you call that, but yeah, just staying a little few millimeters on each side of the point on both sides. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to use a sharp pair of scissors and I'm just going to make a cut right inside the 2 rows of stitching here. So I'm just going to just cut 1 layer at a time. So here I'm just going through the wool. Okay, now I'm going to flip it round and I'm going to do the same to this side. I'm just going to cut into the opening. And completely open here. Now what's happened is some of the pile has got trapped in the stitching. So I'm just going to come on this side and get my comb and just comb the pile away so that it comes out of the seam. Okay, I have brushed out what I reasonably could from each side, but there's still some fur pile that's sort of trapped in the middle. So I'm just going to go ahead and snip that. Okay, so now I've got my slit opening here. In this next step, we are going to turn the lining to the wrong side of the scarf. So what we're going to do is put the whole lining through the opening that we just cut. Feed all of it through. You can see this gets incredibly messy. Lots of fluff everywhere. Okay, so now we're going to turn that all the way to the wrong side like this. Okay, now what we want to do is close the seams going all the way around the scarf. Now, if you want an easy life, the way you can just finish this off really quickly and easily is if you just run a zigzag stitch, just match up the 2 edges here and just do a really neat, and you can do it quite densely so that it looks more decorative, and just go all the way around the edge to join the 2 layers with a nice neat zigzag stitch. If you'd like a challenge, we are going to do a bit of contortion and work to actually bag this out. Okay, so you're going to have to just sort of follow closely. It's not necessarily going to be very intuitive or necessarily easy, but it's definitely going to be the neater way to finish it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Firstly, we're going to pick a point somewhere kind of around here. So just into this side of the scarf. Now, if you imagine, we would normally sew things right sides together when we're bagging things out. So what I'm going to do is effectively put these 2 ends together so they're facing right sides together. Okay, so that's how it's going to look when it's finished. And I'm just going to pinch that in place just so I can get a handle on my space here. Okay, with that still pinched, now I'm just going to maneuver everything so that these two sides sit right sides together. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just clip or pin along. Grab my clips. Again, pulling the pile to the inside. I should have really marked where the centre back was on the lining. That would have helped to match up this centre seam. But anyway, in the absence of that, I will just align them and clip. Okay, so go ahead and clip all the way around. And the idea is that we are going to take it to the machine and we're going to stitch all the way around as far as we can get. Okay, so at some point, what will happen is this bit here, which is twisted, at some point you're going to sort of run out of leeway, right? Because it's going to end up being curled and twisted. So just go around and get as far as you can, and then we will come back and do the next step. So this is as far as I managed to get. I started over here, I went all the way around, and I've come back down to here. What I'm going to do now is just bag that out. So just feed it back through just to turn it back to the right side. Okay, now that side is bagged out. What we want to do is the similar thing over on this side. Now this side is going to be a little bit more tricky because we have this little slit here, which is going to make bagging out in the usual sense not possible. So I'm going to start from this tip here, and I'm going to do the same thing, which is pinch so that the right sides are facing together. And then I'm going to go in from here, so it's just from the side here. And turn these right sides together. So now I'm going to clip together. So this is the end of the scarf. I'm just going to put a clip there to hold that together. And again, I'm just going to clip and sew along here just to as far as I can before it starts twisting and becoming impossible. Once I've made a few little connections with the clips here, I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm just going to match the lining with the faux fur and just clip. And I want to get as far down as I can. Okay, so I think this is kind of as far as I'll get. So I'll start from where the seam is here. I'm going to stitch all the way around this end here. And then I'm just going to keep going on this side as far as I can reasonably get to. So let's take it to the machine and have a go at that. Okay, so this is how far I managed to get. I started over here, I went round this bend, and I got as far as here. So now I just want to bag that out. Okay, so then what I'm left with is these two little gaps here, one on this side, one on this side. All I'm going to do now is just hand stitch those closed, just using a simple slip stitch. All that's really left is to give the edges a little bit of a comb, just to make sure all the pile is out of the seams. Just go ahead and give it a little comb all the way around. Just give your lining a gentle press, and then it's good to go. And now all that remains is for you to enjoy wearing your new scarf. Just tuck one end into the slit, like this. Pull and adjust, and you've got a nice, beautiful, warm, snuggly scarf to keep you cozy during the winter.